As far as Mulroneys go, I'm the unknown. And thank you for those words about my dad. He was my hero. He was my inspiration. He was my leader that I would call all the time. So I'm telling my story really for the first time.
Welcome to Tank Talks, a podcast that brings you insights and stories from some of the best and brightest minds in technology and investing. I'm your host, Matt Cohen, founder and managing partner at Ripple Ventures. On this week's episode, we welcome Nicolas Mulroney, co-founder and CEO of Bond Bakery Brands, to discuss his journey from Bay Street to Bakery Street and how his life growing up with a prime minister as a father shaped him into the entrepreneur he is today. Nick and I discuss his early days working in finance on the trading desk at RBC and how he was able to transition his career over to the corporate development world, where he saw how hard it was being an operator. Next, Nick and I dig into his next act of running a search fund and how he landed on his target acquisition across the country in the baking industry and why he wasn't excited at first about the opportunity. Finally, we asked Nick to share his vision for Bond Bakery and how his life has evolved since becoming an operator and an entrepreneur, and why Canada needs to support more people willing to jump into the founder journey more often. But before we jump into this week's interview, we welcome back to the tank John Ruffolo to discuss the news and stories making headlines in the tech and venture capital ecosystem. Hey, John, welcome back to the tank. Holy, we got a lot to cover here, as a lot more shoes are falling from the fallout of the federal budget. I mean, a lot of talk has been coming around, sort of obviously the capital gains conversations. There's a lot of small group think tanks that are popping up. You were taking part in one of them that was talked about in the media the other day. Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about the meeting you had with obviously Minister Freeland and a couple tech leaders, and what the sort of premise of the conversation was and some of the things that you got out of it were while discussing the capital gains, among other things, with Minister Freeland.
Sure. And Matt, as you can appreciate, when we had a 2-hour discussion, and, we did agree we wouldn't be sharing, a lot of the details, so that would be improper, but it has been reported, and I will validate. The purpose of the meeting was to get the 6 or so of us together to really share the immediate feedback from the innovation community. And we shared that it's coming from 2 buckets. Number one, of course, the entrepreneurs, right? And like everyone knows, entrepreneurs are made from a different material than everyone else. They're not doing it for the money, but they are feeling beaten down, and they are feeling that it's death by 1,000 cuts. Whether it becomes compensation, whether it becomes high cost of living, can't buy a house, blah 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 blah. This is just another nail in the coffin, and I'd say that was the concern of the minister as well, and she has said it publicly that she is concerned. But we did describe that this is probably not a very good policy directed at the most mobile people in our country, and we just saw COVID show how tenuous the cords are in leaving your country. And it's feeling like, to me, back to 2010. The second area was the availability of capital. And it's coming from 2 different places. You have those who are directly affected. So we're talking angels, corporates, foundations, family offices. Because people make their investment decisions based on an after-tax adjusted rate of return. These are really risky investments. You have now made it more difficult for those categories of folks to consider going into the asset class. That's number one. And frankly, money is lost by paying more taxes, and even if they completely reinvest, they'll have less dollars to reinvest. The second one will be the rest. So let's just talk pension funds, et cetera, and the whole pension fund debate has been out there. But at the same time, we've talked about this. You got to make the conditions right for someone to make a prudent decision to invest in great Canadian businesses. Well, if the best and brightest decide to leave because the opportunity is greater to build $1 billion business, then it actually stops even the large pension funds from wanting to make the requisite investments. So This is really poor public policy, particularly when you have a budget that was being deemed in the media as the productivity and innovation budget. But, it ended up being something that's really gone in the face of the folks that you were hoping to actually stimulate.
People are coming out and saying, they don't believe in trickle down economics. I call bullshit to that, because if you're putting these types of blockers up there, you're not just talking about, VC funds or private equity funds. You're talking about corporations. You're talking about angel investors who invest through corporations. You're talking about family offices. The trickle down from that into the innovation economy is just another impediment where we already have such a low productivity problem in Canada. I mean, Senator Colin Deacon out in Halifax, Nova Scotia, had a great tweet on this, talking about, we have such a problem around the domestic investment in Canadian digital and data-driven businesses. These incentives that they're offering through, tax credits, are not enough. How does the mining and resource industry still have flow-through shares, but tech companies don't? Because it's intangible assets.
You may hear again, this was before 2010, money will cross borders and will replace any lost money. Utter bullshit. You need a strong domestic source of capital in order to attract a strong international one. So, this is for a public policy statement that it was made on, which was, tenuous at best in terms of the support for it. It actually turned out, when you actually read one of the authors of the support, it actually, when you read further down, it goes, and by the way, for the venture capital asset class, this is a really bad answer. You just kind of shrug.
You kind of shrug, and I think it's all about sort of like, how can we help the broader population? But it's not just about the broader population. It's about the most impactful and wealth creating and highest value population that should be the most sought after at helping. What else did you hear?
What is the problem that Canada has to solve? We must grow the pie, right? We're having a standard of living issue. We're having a productivity per capita issue. But what this was, it was all about income redistribution. And when you focus in on that, on an ever increasing pie, where the end result happens.
Well, I mean, let's just not even talk about tech and entrepreneurs for a second. Let's talk about the industry that we spend a ton of money on in Canada, which is our healthcare industry.
Yes.
I mean, you talked about how that 40,000 number that was thrown out of the 0.13% of taxpayers they're going after.
Nonsense.
That's not including the doctors and dentists. The Canadian Medical Association, which is obviously an association representing the medical and dental and all the healthcare practitioners, are saying they are going to be squeezed even more. Obviously, a lot of doctors have corporations that they get paid into, and then they take a salary out of those corporations to live on.
Encouraged by the government, by the way.
Encouraged by the government and incentivized, exactly.
To do that.
So now you're asking more overstretched physicians who are already under pressure from the lack of funding and structure around this healthcare industry to be on more of the hook for more spending that this government continues to do. So you're telling the wealthiest, but also maybe the smartest and the most impactful on a life and healthcare basis to pay more.
How many people do you know have a cottage? How many cottages are passed down from one generation to the next, and you have to pay the exit tax when you pass it down? When it's not to a spouse. What happens to folks that are having difficulty making ends meet on the house, and what they're doing is that they're renting out part of their house? Remember, folks, when you have a change in use of your property in your house, a portion of your house is no longer your principal residence, or people have forgotten about that too. It's no longer tax-free. This is not about 40,000 people. This is about millions of folks directly. And then you look at the direct impact. How many folks does, and again, it's small and medium-sized businesses, including the innovation sector. How many people do they employ? And what is the impact of that? This is not a small contained thing. And I think it was sold as that. And that's rather unfortunate.
Right. And so I think, there's a lot of thought leaders around the country trying to put their heads together and trying to shed some knowledge to this government of where this actually will start to impact a lot of jobs and a lot of businesses. Yesterday, former governor of the Bank of Canada, Mark Carney, was speaking at Canada's 2020 Economic Look Ahead in Toronto the other day. And, he had some pretty wise words to say, given his time, obviously, as the UK finance minister as well, living through Brexit, he's seen a lot. So, a couple of things that he talked about as I listened to the CPAC episode was, countries that embrace and celebrate risk takers will thrive, right? Canada is not a country that can afford to be in an arms race. We are a middle power and we have to accept that. So what we need to do is we need to be smarter and we need to focus on key sectors like clean energy and compute.
Correct.
And make a fair and transparent tax strategy that welcomes foreign investment. We need to be the backbone of AI and the clean energy superpower. He said during his time at Brexit, at the UK finance minister, he saw how government can demolish prosperity and force people to leave. And so fueling the power of private markets that are aligned with values is the only way forward. And you can't redistribute your way out of the lack of productivity.
Correct. And Matt, one of the things that I would add to Mark Carney, I completely agree with everything he has said, is if you do not have a bright idea on how to increase that pie, because it's not easy, then you know what? Get out of the way and don't throw grenades in there to actually impede the folks. That's the problem here. And, ultimately, where is the genesis of the problem? It's a spending problem, and they needed to raise taxes to cover up the spending. They already were spending $39 billion. And when you start to look at the stretching beyond the $39 billion of the spending to $59 billion, again, we even have the conversation of why are we spending at a time where we've amassed the greatest deficits in the last 4 years in Canadian history? And, so there's lots of questions around there as well.
Yeah, I think it's so funny because as an investor, we always sort of say yes, our universities are top, sources of, talent and ideas. But what we lack of is the ability to create wealth and prosperity and commercialization of a lot of opportunities. And that just kind of feels like our country, our government right now.
No, absolutely. And worse yet, using the education one, here's where the kick in the face is going to be. We're going to spend the money educating them, and they're going to say, thank you very much. And I will create the value in the United States, for example. This is where we really get hit. And this is what I'm really worried about. And by the way, folks don't believe this. This was the situation before 2010, and we had a serious issues and a serious number of ideas on how to start to reverse that trend. And boy, we just ripped out 10 years of progress and are starting to work backwards.
Last week, we spoke about how there was no suggestions on where the government could be reducing its footprint and size, with the impact of a data-driven or AI solutions. One example that I had firsthand the other day was I had to call the CRA for an HST GST payment. And I was on hold for waited an hour and a half. I was on hold with the CRA for an hour and a half for one quick conversation. Think about the time and wastefulness of that and how we can solve that immediately with AI agents for solving and transferring whatever we need to be done. It's absolutely ridiculous. But John, before we wrap up, where do we go from here? We've had about a week and a half that has passed since the budget has come out, just about that. Where do we go from here?
Again, we're all on the same team, right? And so it should never be about taxpayers versus government versus business, et cetera. We're all Team Canada here. So we really are at a point right now is each side trying to understand, the fundamental problems and seeing, are there other ways available to achieve your objectives? And I will say, Minister Freeland, she was open to looking at solutions, perhaps not to reverse the capital gains, but to mitigate perhaps the impact on it. And so, at least, we do see some light there. Is it enough, though, just to mitigate some of it? I'm not sure yet. But I think what's happening right now, people are starting to unwrap the impact and starting to see this is far more impactful as what was originally suggested. And, we're all in this together to find a solution, as opposed to just simply bitching about it without having an alternative in mind.
Yeah, I mean, you said it the other week, like the conversations now of people saying, forget it, I am mobile, I can pick up and leave. It's a lot easier to do it, are happening across the spectrum. People who I didn't even think would be willing to have those conversations are having them now. And the entrepreneurs that you speak with across the spectrum are all saying, what's the point in setting up a Canadian corporation? Like just set up a Delaware or set up a US corp and just build your business.
It's so easy.
It's so easy. Build your business in the US and come back to Canada from May 2-4 to September long weekend and spend your summers here and then go back and build. It's so crazy.
Exactly.
People can think and do that.
Exactly.
It's going to happen. All right, John, thanks for joining the tank today.
Thanks, Matt.
Now let's jump into the tank for this week's episode with Nicolas Mulroney. Thanks for jumping in the tank today, Nick.
Appreciate it. This is pretty cool. Thanks, Matt.
It's so nice to see you again. And I just want to start off by offering my deepest condolences on the passing of your father, our former Prime Minister, the Right Honorable Brian Mulroney. Truly a once-in-a-lifetime and century kind of man and leader of our country. So just watching you and your family and from all the leaders around the world pay tribute to an incredible man was made me proud to be Canadian, I have to say. But, in case our listeners haven't been, following the news or living under a rock for the last maybe 50 years, it'd be great if we can get a quick background on yourself, where you grew up, your upbringing and family dynamic, and how you made your way into finance and the banking world, and then the baking world in the first part of your career.
From banking to baking. Matt, I appreciate you inviting me on. We've known each other for a while. And thank you for those words about my dad. He was my hero. He was my inspiration. He was my leader that I would call all the time. So, sitting here talking about my journey, my business, I wouldn't be here without him, without my mom, my family. So a bit about that, I think I'm telling my story really for the first time. And as far as Mulroneys go, I think I'm the unknown. That's by design. I was born in Ottawa. My dad was the 18th Prime Minister, as you mentioned, and I moved to Montreal when after he left politics. It was an incredible city, became my hometown. Go Habs go. And I was blessed to have an awesome, awesome family. I was their fourth child. And if you know anything about my siblings, I have some exceptional role models. But I made my way to finance because growing up, I really only had two options, law or finance. It was one or the other. So I took a pre-law class at Boston College and I quickly learned that it just wasn't for me. But luckily for me, that other side of the coin in finance, I had a brother who worked in finance at the time and I looked up to him, still do. And I thought, hey, that's pretty cool. So I'll give it a try. Went to RBC, loved my time there. In fact, that's where I also met my wife, Katie. So I'm not sure how many people in today's world can say they met their wives there at work, but really it was the best thing that ever happened to me. So I have fond memories of RBC.
Yeah, we worked together at RBC, and I remember calling you on the FX desk while I worked with your brother Mark on the equity and sales and trading desk, and obviously knew your wife Katie. But looking back on that time, I'm just curious, like how those long, hectic days that we worked, from very early in the morning to very late at night, shaped you from an operator and a builder perspective with that traditional business background.
I think when you join Canada's largest bank, the busiest trading floor, your head is spinning at 21 years of age. And I think it spun for several years. But one thing was very clear to me. The foreign exchange markets were 24-hour markets. They never closed. So you never knew when the news was going to hit, what the news was. So you always had to be prepared. And the same is true for an operating business. I have assets in British Columbia and in Ontario. I hope to have assets across North America over time, but you never know when you're going to need to spring into action and resolve something pressing. And so I think that as I look back on my time in foreign exchange, I think I learned a lot from being prepared, and that shaped me quite a bit.
That's a great piece of advice. I think about those days a lot, working in Toronto with you and then New York. And I think about how those Sunday night emails would come in and your heart would start racing, not knowing what the Monday morning open would look like. But in today's world where we're always being fed constant information, I feel like we're almost more prepared to kind of filter stuff out that's irrelevant and really hone in on the stuff that's really important that you need to drop everything and focus on. Wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. We're programmed now to have quite the filter to figure out what's important and what's not. So you have, a lot of proverbial fires at work, and it's important for you to figure out, is it like one of those, I have to get to it right now, or can it wait? And so you're absolutely right.
But, after RBC, you spent some time, I believe, at CIBC. You moved your way into the banking world. Then you worked on the corporate development side, I believe, at Park Lawn. Before taking a break from finance, what made you decide to take a little bit of a pause and think about your next act?
I always knew that I wanted to run a business, much like many of the guests that you've had on your show previously that come up with these great ideas and transform their space, their industry, the world that they live in. I never had this aha moment, this idea. So for me, I felt attracted to these boring industries. So you mentioned I went from investment banking to the death care world, learned a lot there, 18 months, quite the industry. And it taught me a lot about being in these old economy businesses. Some refer to them as boring businesses. What I ended up doing was seeing how you could actually impact such an old economy business. I went out to search for those types of businesses. So that kind of led me to the bakery acquisition. And, that's why we're here speaking today.
Yeah, I remember running into you in a coffee shop, long after our finance days together. And I asked what you were doing, sitting in a coffee shop during the middle of the trading day. And you mentioned you were working on this search fund idea, which I'm familiar with, and maybe some of our listeners are, but maybe give us a sense of what that actually process entailed to go out and acquire a traditional business and how you eventually landed on your first target.
So the search fund concept was also relatively new to me. Everybody knows how to go buy a house. Everybody knows where to buy a house. You can go buy clothes. You can buy any goods and services. But like to buy a business it's a challenging market to navigate. Everybody's pretty secretive. So I saw that when I worked in the cemetery space, I worked for an entrepreneur that bought that business, and it was a publicly traded company. What I did is I wanted to go and buy some private businesses and acquire several of them and impact them, perhaps breathing a breath of fresh air into these old economy businesses. So when I ran into you, I was trying to pitch to investors. And so I went out searching for some businesses. I ended up finding one in the fall of 2018. I found a bakery, and it was based in Victoria, BC, of all places. And a little far from downtown Toronto, but that's really where my co-founders came into play. So I partnered with a former colleague from investment banking. And then once we signed some onboarding documents, I kind of mentioned, hey, I found this business that I really like the look of. Like it was this really cool bakery, family run, but the problem was it was in Victoria. So he mentioned that another former colleague of ours had just quit. And I always like when people quit investment banking, especially when you don't have a job in place. So I thought that was fascinating. And he said he moved to Vancouver. So I called him up that afternoon and I said, hey, I found something. It's in Victoria, BC. You want to partner with us, and for some reason he agreed to. This is us back there when we closed on the deal in June of 2019. We were happy. We did not know what was to come, so you had big smiles on our faces. But our search fund process took about 7 months from start to finish. I'd say that's a short timeline. I've spoken to many people over the years, and it could be somewhere between a year to 3 years. That's kind of typical. Yeah, I'd have to say I was quite fortunate that the process only took 7 months.
That's really fast. And what were some of the words of advice you got from your family, especially your father, to go forward with this decision, especially after only 7 months of searching, and then find a business in the baking world in Victoria, BC, to eventually consummate the deal?
So my father, he was my inspiration. He was my biggest supporter. But what he also did was he challenged me to take on some risks. So one of his closest and most long-term friends was Paul Demarais Sr., and he had such great admiration for him and his family. He had been a lawyer. My father was a lawyer for a really long time. He saw firsthand just the success that entrepreneurship can bring to a person, a family. And so I was fortunate when I was going through the process to get some advice from Mr. Demarais. And I utilized it when I started the company. So even though I was going down the entrepreneurship path for the first time, and my dad didn't really have any, tangible advice that he could just kind of give me to when through due diligence or anything like that. I was lucky enough to have his support behind me. And what it did was it gave me this incredible confidence to persevere. And it's something that I desperately needed for the future. So if it wasn't for my dad, I don't think I would have taken the leap to go buy a business in an industry that I had no idea what to do. So really fortunate in that respect.
It's a great relation to like why role models are so important, especially for entrepreneurs, and also to have role models that are accessible, to know that they're real human beings that took the same sort of path that you did just 25, 50 years prior. And so I'm sure like Paul Demarais today may appear to be this, overarching figure in finance and Canada's, business community. But at the beginning, he was an entrepreneur that also had an idea that left the sort of traditional corporate world to start something new. So it's great to hear you say that. Obviously you closed the acquisition. What were some of the unique challenges that you immediately faced with regards to the baking industry versus other industries you looked into? And then walk us through how COVID just smacked you right in the face.
We closed on the acquisition in June of 2019. And then 9 months later, COVID happened. So I would say that was the biggest challenge that I faced. I bought a bakery, an industry I'd never been in, don't know what I'm doing. We're trying to make some wholesale changes to a great family-run business that is authentic and genuine. So you want to be very careful with any of the decisions you make. You want to triple check those before you actually enact them. And then the pandemic hits, and this is not a software business. This is not something remote. Like, we're making bread in a factory. So we needed, our initial challenge was figuring out how to make the product, because we didn't really have a choice. If we didn't make it, we would have to close the doors. But what that also did was it was also the catalyst for this greater vision from Portofino, the search fund, to Bond Bakery Brands, the parent company that I now I run and operate on a daily basis. What we realized was our challenge was making the bread, but people were challenged at the time. I don't know if you remember, but you'd like put your groceries in your garage, Lysol them, sanitize them, keep them there quarantine them for how long until they were safe to come back. Like, the world was unknown, and people had community groups and shelters were in desperate need of products. So what I realized was that how easy it was for us to dispatch our trucks. So we have trucks on the road in Victoria and Vancouver. We dropped them off to any shelter that needed product. Community groups were making sandwiches immediately. And so it was a really unique time, but it planted the seed for what became the larger reason for building a bakery investment platform. Our country has gone through quite the scandal in the bakery space, if I can allude to something that I was not involved with, nor do I particularly approve of. And so from where I stood, I thought I could actually make a change in an old economy industry that so desperately needed it. So challenges, the pandemic presented challenges, but also major opportunities for us.
Yeah. I mean, you must have been up at night all the time thinking about, like, one, how do you fill the immediate needs of what the society needed in a time when, people were mixing their bread with a Lysol spread. And then you also had this sort of like visionary thoughts with your partners of like, well, maybe these things that are pulling us now just out of necessity can actually be new business lines that can expand the platform that we can take Portofino into with the creation of Bond Bakery. I mean, how did your leadership style change from the very beginning through COVID into what it is today, leading Bond Bakery?
It certainly evolved over the years. When I bought Portofino with our group of investors and eventually formed Bond Bakery Brands, I was 34 years old. I had a decade's worth of experience in the capital markets space, which for operating a business, there's not a lot of value to be placed on that unless you're going into a capital markets type of role. And I had an MBA. But honestly, I really had no idea what kind of leader I was. So style, I hadn't, none of that had really been developed. But, through my years in finance, I got some good advice. And one of it was, it always pays to be the nice guy in finance. I'm sure that some not so nice guys, and they're likely still in those glass towers on Bay Street. But to me, it was always important to be considerate. That's how I was raised. I saw leadership firsthand with my dad. He was decisive and he led with conviction. And it worked out really well for him because he always focused on the long-term decisions. And for me, that was always what I looked to. I looked to what I knew. So many of the decisions at Bond are long-term in nature. Nothing I decide to do today will have direct results tomorrow. The decisions I make today have long tail effects in years from now. So it's really important that the leadership style has that long-term perspective. So I really enjoy reading books about those consequential leaders that have built companies, run countries. I borrow some points along the way, but for me, it's to be considerate and to always think long-term.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of long-term, so Portofino was the first acquisition. Now Bond Bakery Brands is the platform, the parent, and you've added some additional assets or acquisitions to the brand portfolio. Can you share some of those investments and sort of how those impacted your business recently and how you thought about them?
When the pandemic hit, we saw the opportunity to create this platform to double down on our experience in the bakery space. And so what we did was we had just purchased this family-run company, and it was genuine. It was authentic. The culture was fantastic. These are things you can't replicate. When my co-founders and I had this idea, we thought, okay, well, let's just go ahead and focus on family and founder-run bakeries, commercial bakeries. We knew that buying a family-run business is always unique. So can we create a platform tailor-made to each individual liquidity opportunity? So for us, we always say that we play the hand that's dealt to us. Everybody might have a unique need. And so what it allowed for us to do was we acquired Pace Processing in the fall of 2020. And then that was also in British Columbia. So we clustered our assets out west by design. And then we made our largest acquisition in 2021 in Mississauga, Ontario, called Coco Bakery. So it's the largest manufacturer of French macarons. And then finally, if you've ever been down the frozen pizza section in Canada, we also acquired Holy Napoli Pizza, which some of my family and friends know very well. But what it's done is we've bought these great founder and family-run businesses, and what Bond Bakery Brands is set up to do is to support their next wave of growth, and that's what we're really focused on at the moment.
Yeah, it's super brilliant. I call it Holy Napoli because it just sounds
You
better,
call it whatever you want.
It's a great pizza.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Do you guys have like a target list? Given you've worked in corporate development, you worked in finance, I gotta assume you have a target list of assets that you're missing that you want to add, like frozen pizzas you added or kids products. How are you running your kind of corporate development process? And then second question, how are you leveraging technology and software to kind of bring more efficiency to these old family-run businesses within the Bond portfolio?
Now we're just getting started. We've got a long list. I'm building this company for the long term, as I mentioned. So I'm excited to go to work every single day. So maybe I'll start with the technology side. So on the technology side, it's a key tool for us. And I think that one of the most important things that we focus on is accessibility of data. What data can we provide our operating presidents? All of our businesses operate independently. We have a president in charge of their operations. So I want to make sure I make the lives of our presidents a lot easier. So can I centralize data for them to access? Is there anything that we can do? And as we continue to grow, as we continue to add products to the portfolio, it's really invaluable to us to provide them access to real-time data so that they can make key decisions. In 2022, volatility was at its all-time high. The conflict in Ukraine caused wheat prices to double. Our industry was thrown for a loop. That data ended up being really valuable to us. And then finally, something a bit smaller, but we also have some trucks on the road, as I mentioned. So we use some route optimization software to do our best to figure out ways to, put the most on our trucks, get the most from our trucks, make sure we're going on the right path. So technology has really influenced our business for the better, but we're continuing to evolve. So if anybody that listens to this has some advice or anything like that, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm active there. Happy to continue to add new software to our businesses. So in terms of what products, if you ask my kids, I'm sure you get like some colorful, sugary things, and that's always good. I have some of that. But I really look at it from the other perspective of not what products we want to add, but what people, what processes. So I think that when it comes to people, processes, and products, if you don't have the first two, it doesn't necessarily matter what the product is. And so, and I'll give you an example. In 2021, we bought Coco Bakery. We made no cake pops. And it's a very popular product. And fast forward probably to the end of this year, we're going to be the second largest cake pop manufacturer in North America. because we have the right people, we have the right processes, and now we have a lot of cake pops that we make.
You're talking about like the things they sell at Starbucks and stuff that kids gobble up with like 400 grams of sugar.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, kids are fantastic. They are one leg to our corporate development stool. It's if the kids won't eat it, it's just not worth making.
That's fantastic. So speaking of that though, with kids, there's so much change happening in the bakery products industry. A lot of trends are changing, obviously, celiac or gluten-free trends and things like that. What are you seeing from the trends department that is sort of changing consumer preferences and taking impact into how you guys think about your vision?
Trends will come and go. In 2019, gluten-free was very, very popular. Finding ways, I mean, people looked at me like I was a little silly buying a bakery and discontinuing the gluten-free line. For us, it's all about staying ahead of the trends, understanding it. So the biggest change that we've seen over the past few years is how a customer shops. Most are now shopping at multiple sources, multiple grocery stores. So whether you go to your club store for some of your larger, bulkier items, and you go to a different type of grocery store for your meats or produce, we're seeing people shop across multiple grocers. And as well, the discount and the dollar stores are doing really well, and they're offering a lot of the staples that you would find at a traditional grocery store, like bread. It's really interesting. I think that it's less about what they're buying and more about how they buy it. But if you want some buzzwords, clean labels, locally sourced, those are all really important to the consumer these days. But I think the trend that we think about a lot is where a customer is shopping and how they shop.
Right. So you try to match that, wholesale middle person with the end customer, because artisanal breads were all the rage, and you've got these, mom and pop bakery shops that only make the product for the day and it's sold out by 11 a.m.
We can't compete with that. We want the mom and pops to continue to make awesome bread. We want to live in the middle and provide some value above your typical generic commercial white bread. We want to be in that middle section.
Nick, you and I are both, trained in the old finance days, working on Bay Street and Wall Street. We're also young fathers, running 24/7 during the daytime and the nighttime. I got to ask you, how are you balancing the demanding role in your personal time with your family and also growing, a very successful early stage business? So, what kind of words of advice did your father share with you with managing your personal time and professional time with you and your siblings as well?
If you add my father into that, I think his passing has provided people, Canadians, with a glimpse into his personal life, and specifically with how he handled some big time professional work with the demands of being a father. He was elected September 4th, 1984. I was born September 4th, 1985. I had no idea what he was, what he did, but what was critical was that he was always there for me. And as I look now into today, it's because of how strong his marriage to my mom was. It's in this world where we're always seeking this work-life balance. I think that she allowed for him to drive to that dream of being Prime Minister of Canada. It's a tough mountain to climb, and together they did it. But what it also meant was that he was raising 4 kids that each had their pressing needs, and from where I stood, he was always there for me. I could call him whenever. My siblings could call him whenever. There are stories of him taking calls, leaving important meetings behind. But being Prime Minister was his dream, and my mom ensured he could chase that. So they were married for over 50 years. And for me, it's about prioritizing my marriage with Katie. We both have big jobs, work long hours, travel for work, and it's important. We both love what we do. So when one of us misses an event, the other one has to pick up the slack, much like, I learned from my parents. But, I think that it all comes back down to prioritizing a marriage, and it's worked for me in my case.
Yeah, it's really important advice to hear. And, there's that 9 to 5 role, and then there's that 5 to 9 role, but they overlap a lot of the times, especially with raising young kids. And then you got to love what you do. Speaking of love what you do, though, you've had some varied experiences, obviously working in finance to start, then moving into corporate, and then eventually into your own journey. What advice would you give to someone who is thinking about leaving that banking job or that corporate job and going out and starting their own business or acquire a legacy business one as you did.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I've been fortunate enough to meet a few people over the years. I usually throw out on LinkedIn a couple of times a year a post offering, support, advice, anything like that. And I love meeting these people that want to quit their jobs, buy a business, escape those glass towers. But Canada's not really set up to spur entrepreneurs. We're not built like the Americans. So anyone wanting to take that leap has a lot on the line. So words of wisdom would be that timing is never right in life. You'll always find an excuse to put it off. So to begin with, if you think about it, you're actually competing against yourself. That's a tough thing to do. So for my advice, like I said, you have to love it. You have to want it. There's going to be some tough moments, like here I am over my shoulder, I'm smiling with my co-founders, little to know there's 9 months down the line, there's a pandemic about to hit us. You need to be determined. It's really not an easy path, but there are a lot of people that have bought a business, started a business. And so reaching out to those that need. So I meet with these people and I follow up with them. And I'm so happy when I actually I bought the business and now what? So those are great conversations to have.
Yeah, having that sense of community and that network doing the same thing, but in different industries is what I found my friends who've gone out and done search funds have really benefited from. I mean, looking them in the eye at the very first day of closing and then looking at them 6 or 9 months later is a very different face of exhaustion, but they still love what they do and they wouldn't change it for the world. Going back to your comment, though, about how Canadians versus Americans in terms of taking chances, I still find it crazy that with the social safety net that we have created in Canada versus what you have none of in the US, we still are lacking entrepreneurship and people willing to take more risk. Isn't that crazy to you?
It is. Yeah.
It's just like we have so much not to lose, whereas Americans have literally no health insurance, no anything, and they could lose it all, but they still decide to do it every single day. And I think it's the way that they just treat entrepreneur success versus us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I wish it was here in Canada. I think that we've got some amazing talent and people that are willing and should take the leap. When I meet with these people, I try and tell them you're competing with yourself. Timing is never right. Yes, but you should still do it. You can change your family's future. You can have an impact. It's really cool.
Nick, you obviously had a couple opportunities before the bakery business came around that you looked at. Which other ones, just to give our listeners a sense of what you passed on, came over your desk?
Well, it's nice to say passed on. It's passed on or couldn't afford or, all these things. But I saw some opportunities. Prefabricated modular homes was pretty cool. Something in the coffee industry. I saw something in the ready to drink space. So there's some really cool opportunities in the year or so that I looked that I would have loved to. That coffee opportunity was really interesting, but I had the bakery opportunity, Portofino, at the side of my desk, and I was always looking for something better because it was in Victoria, and I didn't feel confident that I could find somebody to go help me run it, and so I was always looking for something better. But the more time it spent on my desk, the more I realized it was for me.
Yeah, I guess the lesson there is just don't always look for that perfect fit.
You'll never find it.
You'll never find it. Right. Exactly. Imperfection is what creates more excitement, maybe. Speaking of the baking industry, what do you think will happen in the baking industry over the next decade? And where do you see sort of yourself and the Bond Bakery Brands portfolio over the next 5 years?
I think that consumers are going to continue to drive what our industry delivers. So companies that are nimble and innovative, they're the ones that are going to succeed. And so that's exactly what we do at Bond. So we try and focus on customer growth. What can we do to offer something competitive and differentiated for our customers? For Bond in particular, in the next 5 years, if you exclude any M&A, which is tough to forecast, I think we're going to do over 200 million in sales. It's a lofty goal, but I have a loftier goal of $1 billion in sales. That's just the next step. So again, we're built for the long term, and all signs point to us being able to hit those goals.
That is unbelievable. Canadian products getting that big so fast is incredible.
Yeah. Canadian products that are sold into the US too.
Exactly. Yeah. What's your favorite product? What makes it special?
Portofino makes this garlic and cracked pepper loaf. And so we roast real whole cloves of garlic, none of this, nothing powdery. And so it makes the most awesome grilled cheeses. I tell anybody Portofino bread is the grilled cheese bread. So for me, it's that product. But if you'd ask my kids, as I said before, it's probably Coco's French macarons. But I will say that paste processing makes awesome cookies. And we tucked in a little cookie acquisition a couple of years back. And I think it's probably only a matter of a couple of months until we release something across the country with a retailer, but they make awesome, awesome cookies.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I can't wait to get some more hands on that garlic bread for grilled cheese this weekend.
Yeah, it's available at Walmart in Ontario.
That's incredible, actually. You got into Walmart pretty quickly, didn't you?
Overnight success, right? Years and years in the making.
That's impressive. What's the best piece of advice you ever received, either from your dad or someone else in your network, that you'd like to pass on to our listeners, personal or professional?
The best advice I got from my dad, I don't think it's anything that, you're going to put up in any inspirational billboards or anything like that. It was just so timely. When we ran into each other and I was pitching any investor that would listen to me, I was buying a bakery on the other side of the country, an industry that I had no idea about. The cannabis industry could raise any dollar that they wanted, and gluten-free was like my headwind. And so everybody was thinking, like, what are you doing? Here I am trying to buy this, this boring bakery. And we went to over 80 groups and we heard over 50 no's. And my dad just told my partners and me, he goes, it's an election. You have to win. It was the decision that we made to go into it. There's no other option. And looking at it now, it was right. We had to figure out a way to make it work. So while we heard all of those no's, and we learned a lot during that time, like we look back and yes, it's an election, you have to win. It's not going to be on any pillows or any, any inspirational posters, but to us, it was so timely and it captured what we needed to do at the moment. So I look back and that was pretty impactful.
It's a mindset that he was sharing and that he had, obviously, when it came to any sort of big decision or any decision really you had to make. That's fantastic. Before we wrap things up, we always ask our guests for their fast favorites. So first off, your favorite podcast.
How I Built This.
Any specific ones?
He's actually done a couple bakery ones. So you can actually...
I can't wait to hear you on that one. This will be a warm-up for that.
There was Dave's Killer Bread. So there's a few good ones.
That's awesome. Next is your favorite newsletter or blog.
This one... Probably no surprise, New York Times Deal Book. Every morning I get all the information I need. So there it is.
Still read it, huh?
Absolutely. Still relevant.
Favorite tech gadget?
My phone.
Nice. Favorite new trend?
I love this Ozempic factor. I'm fascinated to see what's going to happen long term. I'm fascinated.
Why are you so fascinated by it?
Well, it's really enhancing the way people live their lives. Like, is it diet plus exercise? Is exercise picking up? Is it how they eat? When I think about my business, I wouldn't say that it's a near-term headwind, but it's certainly a long-term consideration. So as I plan my business in the long term, it's a trend that I certainly follow. So yeah, the Ozempic factor would be.
Next is your favorite book.
The Outsiders by Thorndike.
I've not heard that one on the podcast, but definitely an oldie but a goodie.
I bought a bakery. I had no idea what I was doing. So from banking to baking, like that's one where it got me to think like, yeah, I could actually, buy a business in an industry that I have no idea and maybe make it work. So.
Yeah. And this one, I'm sure you've got dozens, but we'll try for your favorite life lesson.
I love Arnold Palmer's old saying. It's a funny thing. The more I practice, the luckier I get. And hard work, determination. But, every once in a while you get lucky. I got lucky when my co-founder quit his job and moved to Vancouver. That really changed things around. But, it's like put myself to be in that position. So yeah, the more you practice, the luckier you get.
Fantastic. And all the best success to you and the team at Bond Bakery with Nicolas Mulroney, President and CEO of Bond Bakery.
Thanks, Matt.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Tank Talks. We hope you found today's conversation as insightful as we did. If you're enjoying the show, we've got 3 quick things to ask of you. First, hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcast, or YouTube. Next, follow us and stay up to date on upcoming episodes and behind-the-scenes content on social media with Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And lastly, share the love. If you found value in today's episode, share with a friend or colleague who'd benefit too. Your support helps us bring in more amazing guests and keeps the Tank Talks engine running. That's it for today. Until next time, keep disrupting and innovating.